Did you ever do something? Just to help out? Just to lighten a load for someone else? I didn't take that job at the laundromat for myself. No, I took it because my mom was drowning. Bills stacking up, late notices piling on top of each other, and I thought, well, I'm 18. It's my turn to pitch in, right? That's how it started. Funny how simple choices can lead you to places you never wanted to go. I was just supposed to be working an ordinary night shift, cleaning up, locking the doors. But that place, Final Spin Laundromat. It wasn't just any laundromat. I wish someone had told me that. I wish Bill, the manager, had explained what I was really walking into that night. But maybe it wouldn't have mattered. When I walked into Final Spin for the first time, I thought it was just old. Like the kind of place that hadn't been updated in decades. The floors were scuffed, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzed and flickered just enough to annoy you. And the air, it felt stale, heavy, like it had soaked up years of secrets, dark ones, held tight and never let go. Bill didn't look like the type of guy to joke around. His handshake was cold, his gaze haunted. He didn't even smile when he hired me, just pressed a folded paper into my hand and mumbled, "You follow these rules, no exceptions." I should have walked out right then and there, but I didn't. And that decision? It changed everything. Later that night, I sat down at the counter, unwrapping that crumpled paper Bill had given me. And what I saw? It was nothing like I expected. I'll never forget those words, those rules. Rule 1, don't use the dryers between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. Why not? I wondered. Did they overheat? Did they leak? Maybe it was some fire hazard thing, but there was no explanation. Just don't. Rule 2, if the lights flicker, stand perfectly still until they stop. Okay, flickering lights. I dealt with that before, right? But why stand still? What could that possibly do? Rule 3, if someone walks in with a red scarf, stay behind the counter and don't make eye contact. That one got under my skin. A red scarf? Something so specific it felt intentional. Rule 4, don't answer the phone if it rings after 3:15 a.m. Now that one really confused me. Why would I avoid answering the phone? Was there someone on the other end I shouldn't talk to? Rule 5, if you hear footsteps in the back room, lock the door and wait 5 minutes before unlocking it. Footsteps in the back room? The back room was tiny, barely enough space for a few supplies. But the idea of someone or something moving around back there, it made my skin crawl. I read those rules over and over, trying to make sense of them, trying to find some kind of logic. But all I found was fear. An unease that gnawed at me like a slow-burning fire. That first night felt like an eternity. I kept glancing at the clock, counting down the minutes, praying the shift would end. Every noise, every hum of the machines felt like a warning. Like the laundromat itself was breathing, watching. Midnight came and went. I'd never felt time drag so slowly. My eyes kept drifting to the dryers. 1 a.m. was coming up and a strange thought struck me. What would happen if I broke Rule 1? If I loaded the dryers and just waited to see what would happen? I shook the thought off, laughing at myself. It was ridiculous, right? A dryer's just a dryer. But as 1 a.m. crept closer, I could feel this tension in the air, like something was waiting for me to mess up. I started pacing, trying to shake the nerves. I even picked up a magazine, flipping through the pages just to distract myself. But the dryers, I couldn't take my eyes off them. The seconds ticked by, painfully slow, and then 1 a.m. hit. I stood there, frozen, listening to the quiet hum of the machines. Nothing happened, nothing at all. I took a deep breath, letting out a laugh, relief washing over me. Maybe the rules were just some twisted prank. But just as I started to relax, the lights overhead flickered. That buzz, that static hum, it sent a shiver down my spine. I remembered Rule 2, stand perfectly still, so I did. I felt like an idiot, standing there, unmoving in the middle of an empty laundromat. But as the seconds dragged on, the flickering grew worse, the buzzing louder. It felt like the lights were stuttering, struggling against something pushing back. The flickering stopped as suddenly as it started. I let out a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. The silence afterward felt heavy, suffocating, as if something dark had settled in the air around me. I laughed it off, told myself it was nothing. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The second night was worse, much worse. That feeling, that sense of being watched, it was stronger. The laundromat felt off, like the walls were closing in. I kept hearing these faint, almost imperceptible whispers coming from somewhere in the back. I'd turn around, half expecting to see someone, but there was nothing, just empty rows of machines. Around 3 a.m. I heard it. The phone. It started ringing, slicing through the silence like a knife. I stared at it, my hand twitching, reaching for the receiver. But Rule 4 came flooding back. Don't answer the phone if it rings after 3:15 a.m. I glanced at the clock. It was 3:16. I should have ignored it. I know that now. But back then, I thought, what harm could it do? It's just a phone call, right? I picked up the receiver, pressing it to my ear. Nothing, just static. I listened, feeling that familiar unease gnawing at me. The static grew louder, deeper, almost like breathing. It sounded close, too close, like someone was on the other end, whispering just out of earshot. I slammed the phone down, heart pounding, my mind racing with questions. But as the silence returned, something strange happened. A faint scent filled the air, one I hadn't noticed before. It was wet, earthy, like the smell of rain-soaked dirt. And as I breathed it in, that dread returned, stronger than ever. By the third night, I was ready to quit. I hadn't slept in days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flickering lights, heard whispers echoing in my mind. But I needed the money, so I told myself it was just a job. Just one more night. But that night, something changed. Something darker crept in. Around 2 a.m., the doorbell chimed. I looked up, expecting the usual late-night customer, someone too tired or drunk to care about laundry at that hour. But it wasn't just anyone, it was him. He wore a red scarf, wrapped tightly around his neck, and he stood there, still as stone, his gaze locked on me. Rule 3 flashed in my mind. If someone walks in with a red scarf, stay behind the counter and don't make eye contact. I could feel his eyes on me, burning through me, even as I looked away. My hands clenched around the counter, my knuckles turning white. I told myself to ignore him, to wait until he left. But the air grew colder, sharper, each second stretching out into eternity. After what felt like hours, he turned and walked out. But I made a mistake. Just as he reached the door, I glanced up, catching a glimpse of his face in the glass reflection. His eyes were black, hollow, like two empty voids staring back at me. I felt a shiver run down my spine, a chill that sank deep into my bones. He was gone, but the image of those empty eyes, it wouldn't leave me. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a trick of the light. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized, those eyes? They'd looked right into me, right into something dark and twisted that I didn't even know was there. By the fourth night, my nerves were shot. Every sound, every creak felt like a threat. I was jittery, on edge, jumping at shadows. The rules? They weren't just guidelines anymore. They were my only lifeline. Around 1:30 a.m., I was cleaning the folding table near the back when I heard it. A soft, hesitant knock, coming from the back room. I froze, my heart pounding, the blood draining from my face. Rule 5, if you hear footsteps in the back room, lock the door and wait 5 minutes before unlocking it. I turned slowly, my eyes fixed on the dark outline of the back room door. The knock came again, louder this time. My hands were shaking as I locked the door, stepping back, pressing myself against the wall. The seconds dragged on, each one stretching longer than the last. I could hear something moving behind the door, a faint scratching, like nails against wood. And then, silence. The kind that pressed in on all sides, suffocating, waiting. After 5 minutes, I unlocked the door, hands trembling, breath shallow. And there, lying on the floor, was a crumpled, wet red scarf. I stared at it, my mind reeling, my heart racing. The scarf looked old, waterlogged, like it had been left out in the rain for weeks. But there was no rain, no water. And as I reached down to pick it up, that earthy, damp smell filled the air again, thicker this time, almost choking. I dropped the scarf, backing away, my mind screaming at me to leave, to get out. But something kept me there. Some dark pull, like the laundromat itself was holding me, refusing to let me go. By the 5th night, I was a mess. I could barely keep my eyes open, but every time I drifted close to sleep, I'd jerk awake, heart racing, feeling like I'd missed something. That's how it went. Every night, the laundromat seemed to pull a little more out of me, bit by bit. Like it was feeding on my exhaustion, on the fear I tried so hard to push down. And that night, the rules didn't just feel like a safety net. They felt like chains, holding me in place, keeping me from slipping into something darker. I think part of me knew, somehow, if I let my guard down, if I missed even one rule, it would be the end. The laundromat was silent when I arrived. Almost too silent, like the entire building was holding its breath. I started my shift, cleaning the floors, restocking the supplies, trying to ignore the oppressive weight pressing down on me. But as midnight crept closer, that sense of being watched, it intensified. Around 3:15 a.m., the phone rang again. The sound cut through the silence like a knife, jarring, relentless. I stared at it, remembering Rule 4, don't answer the phone if it rings after 3:15 a.m. But the sound, it was almost hypnotic, pulling me closer, like a siren's call. The phone kept ringing, insistent, each ring digging deeper into my mind. And then, just as I was about to pick it up, I stopped, my hand hovering over the receiver. I glanced at the clock, 3:17 a.m. 2 minutes past the rule. My heart skipped a beat, a cold shiver racing down my spine, but still, the phone kept ringing. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the phone, the ringing relentless, pounding in my head. I remember whispering to myself, don't answer it. Just don't answer it. But the temptation, it was overwhelming. I felt like I needed to hear it, needed to know what was on the other end. Why? Why are there so many rules? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He hesitated, his gaze flickering, his mouth opening as if he was going to say something, but then he closed it, shaking his head. The rules keep you safe, he said, his voice low, almost regretful. They're all that's standing between you and them. Them? I echoed, my heart pounding. But Bill didn't answer. He just turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows, leaving me alone with nothing but questions and a new rule that felt like a final warning. By the 11th night, the laundromat felt like a prison. Each time I walked through those doors, it felt like stepping into a different world. One twisted and distorted, a place where reality and nightmare bled together. And I was beginning to lose track of which was which. That night, the lights seemed dimmer, the machines humming in a strange, almost discordant rhythm. Like a heartbeat, pulsing, throbbing. I could feel it in my veins, each beat syncing with my own heart, pulling me deeper into the laundromat's dark, suffocating embrace. Around 4:30 a.m., just as I was beginning to relax, thinking I'd make it through the night, I saw him. The man in the red scarf, standing outside, his face pressed against the glass, his dark, empty eyes fixed on me. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, staring, his gaze piercing through the glass, through me, reaching into the depths of my soul. I backed away, my heart racing, my mind screaming at me to look away, to ignore him. But something held me there, something dark and twisted, a compulsion I couldn't resist. And then he smiled. A slow, empty smile that sent a shiver racing down my spine. He raised a hand, pressing it against the glass, his fingers long, thin, almost inhuman. I could see his breath fogging up the glass, each exhale leaving a faint, ghostly mark, like a whisper, a reminder that he was real. That he was here, waiting for me. I felt my legs tremble, my body frozen, my mind reeling. And then, just as suddenly as he'd appeared, he vanished, his form dissolving into the shadows, leaving behind only the faint imprint of his hand on the glass. By the 12th night, the laundromat had become a living nightmare. Every shadow felt alive, every sound a threat, every flicker of light a warning. I was barely holding on, my mind fraying, my sanity slipping through my fingers like sand. That night, the air was thick, heavy, each breath a struggle. I felt it the moment I walked in, a darkness, a presence, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting, watching, hungry. It was like the laundromat itself was alive, its walls pulsing, breathing, each corner hiding something twisted, something wrong. Around 3:30 a.m. I heard it again, the whispers, soft at first, then louder, more insistent, filling the silence, echoing in my mind. I closed my eyes, pressing my hands to my ears, trying to block it out, but the whispers grew louder, sharper, cutting through my thoughts, filling my mind with dark, twisted images. I saw shadows, dark and shifting, figures lurking in the corners, their eyes hollow, empty, staring at me, reaching out, their fingers long, clawed, stretching toward me. I felt myself slipping, my grip on reality weakening, my mind fracturing under the weight of their gaze. And then they spoke. A voice, dark and cold, whispering in my ear, words I couldn't understand, words that twisted and turned, wrapping around my mind, pulling me deeper, deeper into the darkness. "Join us," it whispered, the words echoing in my mind, each syllable a dark promise, a summons. "Come into the shadows. Become one of us." I opened my eyes, my heart racing, my body trembling. But the shadows were gone, the voices silent, leaving behind only the cold, suffocating darkness. By the 13th night, I knew I wouldn't make it out. The laundromat had its hooks in me, pulling me deeper, binding me to its dark, twisted web. And I was too far gone to fight it. That night, Bill was waiting for me again, his face pale, his eyes haunted. He handed me another slip of paper, his hands trembling. Another rule, a final warning, Rule 7. If the door opens at 5:55 a.m., do not look back, do not acknowledge them, leave the building, and never return. I stared at the rule, my heart pounding, my mind racing. A final rule, a final test. I looked up at Bill, half expecting him to explain, to give me some kind of reassurance. But he just looked at me, his gaze filled with a sadness, a regret that sent a shiver racing down my spine. What's going to happen?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer. Just turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows, leaving me alone with nothing but questions and a final rule that felt like a death sentence. By the 14th night, I was barely more than a ghost, a shadow, a hollow shell of myself. The laundromat had taken everything, my mind, my sanity, my soul. And all that was left was fear. That night, the air was thick, suffocating, each breath a struggle. I could feel it, the darkness, the presence, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting, watching, hungry. And then, the door opened, slowly, silently, like a breath, like a whisper. I felt it before I saw it, a cold, suffocating dread that wrapped around me, pulling me deeper, deeper into the darkness. I wanted to look back to see who or what was waiting. But Rule 7 echoed in my mind, a final warning, a lifeline. Don't look back. Don't acknowledge them. I took a step forward, my body trembling, my heart racing. Another step and another, each one a struggle, each one a test of my will. And then, I was outside, the cold night air washing over me, the darkness lifting, releasing its hold on me. I never looked back. I didn't dare. I just walked, my footsteps echoing in the silence, my heart pounding, my mind racing. I didn't know what I'd escaped, what dark, twisted force had claimed the laundromat. But I knew I'd never return. The laundromat still stands, silent, waiting, watching. And sometimes late at night I can still hear the whispers calling to me, beckoning me back. But I don't go. I don't look back. Because the rules, they were there for a reason. A reason I'll never fully understand. But if you ever find yourself at Final Spin, staring down that list of rules, take my advice. Follow them. And whatever you do, don't dry after dark. So that's it. That's everything. Maybe you think I'm crazy, or maybe you think it's all just some story, but I swear to you, every word I've said is true. Final Spin isn't just any laundromat. It's a place where the darkness waits, hungry and patient. It lures people in, binds them, makes them part of its twisted game. And if you ever find yourself there, staring at that flickering, open 24 hours sign, just keep driving. Don't look in the windows. Don't wonder about what's inside. Because once you step through those doors, the rules are all you have. And if you're ever tempted by a job offer that seems just a little too good to be true, ask yourself, are you ready to follow the rules? Are you sure you can resist the darkness that waits for just one slip-up? Because once it has you, it never lets go. So please, take this seriously. Remember my story. And whatever you do, don't dry after dark.